Imagine pulling into your driveway and realizing your home doesn't exist anymore. No warning, no call, just an empty lot. I never imagined I'd come home from work to find an empty lot where my house used to be. Not damaged, not broken, gone. At first, my mind couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. I stood there on the sidewalk, briefcase in one hand, keys in the other, staring straight ahead like I had taken a wrong turn into someone else's life. The familiar blue house with the white porch railings, the one I painted myself, wasn't there. The oak tree I planted the year I moved in was gone too. All that remained was churned up dirt, cracked concrete, and tire marks from heavy machinery. Right in the middle of the lot stood a wooden stake with a bright orange notice flapping violently in the wind. Property seized due to unpaid HOA dues. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. It had to be a joke, a prank show, some kind of mistake that would be fixed with a phone call and an apology. Houses don't just disappear. Not like this. I walked closer, heart pounding harder with every step, reading the notice again and again as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. My hands started shaking. The air felt heavy. The street was quiet, too quiet, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. This was my home, the place where I drank coffee every morning on the porch, where I collapsed on the couch after long days at work, where every scratch on the wall and creak in the floor had a story. I called the HOA immediately, straight to voicemail. I called again and again. No answer. My panic turned into desperation as I called the city. I explained everything, my words tumbling over each other. The woman on the line listened, then calmly said something that made my stomach drop. "Sir, this appears to be a civil matter." A civil matter? As if my entire life hadn't just been erased. I walked back to the notice and carefully read the paperwork taped to the stake. According to the documents, my home had been legally demolished after multiple ignored notices regarding unpaid HOA dues totaling just over $1,200. The dates stretched back months. There were references to warnings, final notices, and enforcement actions. None of it made sense. I never received a single notice. No letters in my mailbox, no emails in my inbox, no calls, no warnings taped to my door. Nothing. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my bank records right there in the dirt. Payment after payment. Every HOA fee paid on time. No missed months. No overdue balance. So how did it get this far? How does a situation jump from a supposed $1,200 debt to bulldozers tearing down a lived-in home? That's when the doubt crept. And what if something went wrong? What if a payment didn't go through? What if there was an error I didn't catch? I stood there alone, surrounded by rubble and silence, realizing something terrifying. Whatever happened, someone decided my house was expendable, and my nightmare was only just beginning. The next morning, I didn't hesitate. I didn't call ahead, I didn't cool off. I marched straight into the HOA office with a knot in my chest and one clear goal: to get answers. The moment I walked in, something felt off. They weren't surprised. No frantic apologies. No shocked reactions. Just calm faces and quiet keyboards like they'd been expecting me. That calmness made my blood boil. Anyone with a conscience would have panicked after tearing down someone's home. They acted like I was there to dispute a parking ticket. The manager invited me into her office and sat down across from me without a word. Then she slid a thick folder across the desk. Slow, controlled, routine. Inside were copies of notices they claimed had been mailed to me over the past 8 months. Late payment warnings, final notices, enforcement letters, all neatly organized, stamped, and dated. My name was spelled correctly. The address looked right at first glance. But then I noticed it. Every envelope had been returned, stamped in red. Ink one after another were the same words: undeliverable. That's when the puzzle pieces finally started falling into place. Months earlier, the HOA had quietly switched management companies. New systems, new databases, new employees. Somewhere during that transition, my address had been entered incorrectly. One missing number, One tiny, careless mistake that changed everything. Because of that single error, every warning they sent never reached me. But instead of stopping to investigate why none of their notices were getting through, they did the unthinkable. They assumed I was ignoring them. They claimed I refused to comply. They placed a lien on my property without ever speaking to me and pushed the issue forward like it was just another line item on a checklist. And somehow, unbelievably, it escalated all the way to demolition. I leaned forward and asked the question that had been burning in my chest since the day before. How is it legal to demolish a fully paid-off home over HOA dues? The manager didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look uncomfortable. She simply said, "It's in the contract you signed." That was the moment shock gave way to rage. I asked her why no one had picked up a phone, why no one had knocked on my door, why no one had stood in front of my actual house, clearly occupied, and thought, maybe we should double-check this. She didn't have an answer. She shrugged, a shrug, as if my home was just a misplaced file or a scheduling error. Then she leaned back in her chair and said the sentence that made my hands clench into fists. "If you have a problem," she said calmly, "you're welcome to file a complaint." That's when I realized something important. They didn't think they'd done anything wrong. They thought they were untouchable. And that's when I slowly reached into my jacket, because in that moment, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I didn't pull out a weapon. I didn't raise my voice. I reached calmly into my jacket and placed my badge on the desk. The effect was instant. The room went dead silent, like someone had hit a mute button. The clicking of keyboards outside the office stopped. The manager's confident posture stiffened. Color drained from her face so fast it was almost frightening. Because this wasn't the badge of a mall cop or private security guard. I was a federal investigator. And in that single moment, everything shifted. This was no longer a frustrated homeowner arguing with an HOA over paperwork. This was someone trained to read between the lines, trace money and expose misconduct. Someone who knew exactly how systems were supposed to work, and how they were abused when people thought no one was watching. I didn't threaten them. I didn't accuse them. I simply placed the badge where everyone in the room could see it and asked one calm, controlled question. Who approved the demolition order? The manager swallowed hard. Her hands, which had been resting confidently on the desk just seconds earlier, began to tremble. She mumbled something about standard procedure and automated enforcement. The words came out fast and messy, like she was hoping speed would replace substance. It didn't. I leaned back and asked for documentation, not summaries, not explanations. The actual records. Contractor agreements. Payment authorizations, internal emails, board meeting minutes, approval chains. Every piece of paper that led from a supposed missed HOA payment to a bulldozer, tearing through my front wall. That's when the cracks started to show. The manager hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the file cabinet in the corner of the room, then toward the door. She knew exactly what I was going to find, and when the records came out, the truth unraveled fast. The demolition company, owned by a close relative of an HOA board member. The lien process, fast-tracked far beyond normal timelines. The final approval, signed, off without proper verification, inspections, or homeowner contact. No court oversight, no final confirmation, no human being stopping to ask if something was wrong. This wasn't just negligence. It was reckless. They hadn't followed procedure. They'd bulldozed through it. Rules were bent, safeguards were skipped, and every shortcut benefited the same small group of people. In other words, this wasn't an accident. They cut corners. Big ones. The manager's tone changed immediately. The confidence vanished. She started apologizing, then over-apologizing. She talked about misunderstandings, about how they could work together. She even mentioned helping to rebuild as if this were a broken fence instead of a destroyed home. But it was far too late for damage control. Once that badge hit the desk, there was no walking this back. I stood up, looked her in the eye, and told her they would be hearing from my legal team. and possibly from people far more serious than me. That's when she stopped talking. That's when they realized this wasn't going away, and that's when the room froze. Because for the first time, the HOA understood they weren't in control anymore. Within weeks, everything changed, and it changed fast. What the HOA thought would be a quiet dispute turned into a legal wildfire. Their insurance company stepped in almost immediately, not to protect them, but to limit the damage. Lawsuits followed from multiple directions, and suddenly the same people who once shrugged at me were scrambling to protect themselves. Independent investigators were brought in, and what they uncovered was worse than anyone expected. There was clear evidence of negligence. Critical safeguards had been ignored. Required verification steps were skipped. Even more damning, investigators uncovered conflicts of interest buried deep in the paperwork, connections that should have disqualified decisions from ever being approved in the first place. The HOA board member tied to the demolition company resigned quietly within days, then vanished. No farewell email, no explanation to homeowners, just gone. As the investigation expanded, the HOA's legal defense collapsed. Emails, invoices, and internal records painted a clear picture of unchecked authority and careless enforcement. Homeowner protection laws had been violated repeatedly, and the cost of those violations was no longer theoretical. The final ruling was devastating. For them, the HOA was ordered to cover full reconstruction costs for my home, not repairs, not partial compensation, a complete rebuild. On top of that, they were forced to pay for temporary housing, emotional distress damages, legal fees, and additional penalties tied to procedural misconduct. For the first time since that day, I stood staring at an empty lot. I could breathe again. My house was rebuilt from the ground up, bigger, stronger, better. Every permit was triple-checked, every inspection documented, every approval signed and archived. No shortcuts, no assumptions. When I finally walked back through the front door, it felt like reclaiming a piece of my life that had been stolen. But the changes didn't stop with me. The HOA was forced into sweeping reform. New policies were written under legal supervision. They now require triple verification before issuing even a late notice. Homeowners receive both digital and physical communication for every action taken, and demolitions. They're now practically impossible without court oversight and multiple external approvals. The power they once wielded so casually had been stripped down to something accountable. Yet even after everything was fixed, one thought still keeps me up at night. If I hadn't had that badge, if I hadn't known how to demand records, recognize red flags, and push back, my life would have been permanently destroyed over a clerical error and unchecked authority. That reality is terrifying. So let this be a warning, not just a story. Read your HOA contracts carefully. Document every payment, no matter how small. Save emails. Screenshot confirmations. Keep records. Never assume someone else will protect your property just because they're supposed to. Because sometimes the people meant to manage your community are the very ones who can tear it down without hesitation. And sometimes they only stop when they realize they messed with the wrong person. Like, subscribe and stay sharp, because you never know when a story like this could be yours.